Cash Khan, welcome to the Man of War podcast, man. It's an honor to have you on here.
No, honor for me, man. Pleasure.
All right, so look, there's a lot of people out there that may not know who you are. I don't know how because I tell you, you got a lot of videos out there and you are consistent. Every time I watch one of your videos, I'm like, damn, this guy has something else. Damn. Oh, so I can't eat this. Oh, so I'm like, it's crazy. It's crazy. All right. So, for those who don't know you, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so I actually didn't come from this space or industry. I was in the PR world, so I used to help technology startups grow. That's what I did. I'm in Toronto, by the way, and we have sort of a Silicon Valley North here, big tech industry. And I got really sick. So, while I was helping all these companies thrive, I was doing horribly to the point where I had eczema all over my face, I had psoriasis all over my body, I had gut issues, migraines, depression, like just everything was falling apart. First time ever in my life I needed to see a doctor for anything other than your typical cold and flu stuff when you're a kid. And first time I realized what doctors did, which is diagnose and prescribe, which is not what I was looking for. I was like, why did I get sick? It can't be a coincidence that all these different things are all happening at once. And the answer was, here's the five different doctors that deal with your five different problems and the five different pills you have to take.
Mm.
That forced me down this journey of self-discovery where I started to learn traditional Chinese medicine, naturopathy, homeopathy, you name it. And I learned there were people that did root cause, and it was more what we already knew that we forgot, as opposed to the modern chemical medicine. And I found through my unique genetics, my DNA, what was broken. I then started a genetic research company. That genetic research company now supplies testing to thousands of clinics. And since then, I merged the company with a telemedicine company. I don't run it anymore. And now I've been on this sort of infinite journey of finding what's going on with our hormones, our brains, our anxiety, our sleep, or whatever. And I learn something new every hour that I now need to scream from the rooftops about. And that led to a very unintentional social media presence.
Amazing, amazing. So, yeah, let's dial right into it. All right. Look, it's, we are in a world right now where we don't know what we can eat, the things that we put on our body, the things that, for anything from creams to things that you put inside your mouth, things that you touch, you feel, it's everything that there's always something going on. But let me start with water, basic elements. Okay. With water. What is your take on it? I mean, there are so many people talking about filters, filtered water, blah blah blah, and I don't know, man. There's it's so confusing for me. So maybe you can guide us down the right road here.
There's the basics, and then there's some stuff that's much more complex that's out of our awareness. And the basics are you need to filter, whether it's reverse osmosis is the ideal scenario. You're pulling everything out, but you're also pulling the minerals out, which means you need to add them back in. Then there's some complexities where I was doing some research around Parkinson's. I've spent the last 7 years reversing people's chronic diseases, like literally people with Alzheimer's, cancers, etc., figuring out the root cause and why, and then helping them reverse, including things like Parkinson's that we don't think are reversible, right?
Mhm.
So here's what I discovered in my research. There's a military base in North Carolina and in that base, by the way, the US military has one of the best healthcare databases in the world. There's a ton of soldiers to follow, so they have a lot of participants, and they're very good at tracking it, right? And so, this particular base, there's data that shows that if you were a veteran from there, you have a 30% greater chance of developing Parkinson's. And so that data doesn't make sense because we believe it's this genetic condition that it's in your family and it's just going to turn on one day, right? So why then in this one particular location? So I started to dig deeper and think that, okay, well, if it's a neurodegenerative issue, there must be something neurodegenerative. And now I can prove that Parkinson's is caused and it's not an innate genetic condition. And what I learned, the water in that military base is loaded with a chemical called TCE, which comes from industrial spill off. It's a forever chemical, so it doesn't break down. So even after you process the water, filter it, it's still live and active as if day one, right?
Mm.
This chemical is neurodegenerative. It will destroy your nervous system. It will break down your neurons, start to have you lose control, physical form, and eventually a doctor will point a finger and say, that looks like Parkinson's, right? And so I then went to dig deeper and found that this water is in 30% of American tap water.
No way.
This chemical, I should say, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Whoa.
No surprise, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, all these neurodegenerative conditions are shooting through the roof. So there's the basics of filter. You must, if you live in the United States. There's the more complex, like what's in your water where you live. Then there's things like radiation, which you can find online and maps every city in the United States. But there's also something in the middle, like, structuring your water and the industrial processing that breaks down the molecules so it's not so absorbable by your cells. There's also, hydrogenating your water and turning it into a super fuel that feeds your body instead of hurts you. And we
Hmm.
can spend the entire hour or two talking about water if we wanted.
Hmm. Right,
But
right, right.
those are some basics.
Well, so what's your take on bottled water? And, forget about filters right now, but like bottled water where you're buying it, I don't know, the Dasani water and things like that.
Well, we need to understand that water holds frequency. Water is not just hydration. That's what we've broken down this really complex tool into something so simple. And
Hmm.
this is very common with things that actually heal you. Their true value is removed. Like we call, folate B9. We call cobalamin B12 to reduce their value in our mind, as opposed to what they actually do. These are compounds that are very important for the body, right?
Hmm.
Same thing with water. It's like, oh, I'm thirsty, I need hydration. There's so much more to water than that. It holds frequency and information that your cells read to understand based on where you live, the water is aligned with what you need to live in that location. And now you drink Perrier that came from France and you live in New Jersey, right? And it's like the frequency and information in the water doesn't serve you in that location. Then there's the bottling itself and the plastics and the microplastics. The
Right,
average
right.
American takes in a credit card worth of plastic per week.
Oh,
And a
man.
lot of that has to do with the plastic packaging, right? So that's what and plastic is very hard to get out of the body. It's doable, but hard. So those are a couple things to think about. Local water, there's much more than just the water. There's also the mineral content, which is again aligned to what you need in that location, right? And the energy signal or the frequency signal, which is communication. Everything comes down to communication through frequency and sound, and water does the same thing.
So why don't more like water companies do this in glass? Is there a difference between glass and plastic in your
Oh,
mind?
huge difference. Yeah, and not only glass, but even what color glass, like the blue cobalt,
Uh-huh.
when sunlight penetrates that blue cobalt and it gets into the water, it turns it into a healing superfood, not just a hydration
Oh,
tool.
no way. Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And same thing with amber. There's different benefits for amber and cobalt. And so you'll see, like for example, Saratoga. There's that famous guy who's washing his face in the Saratoga water, the blue bottle, right?
Yes. Yeah, I've seen
One
it.
of the benefits. Yeah, yeah. That's one of the benefits of that cobalt. It actually changes. Remember, light is another form of information. There's so much more that we get from sun than just vitamin D. There's a lot of information in that sunlight spectrum,
Hmm.
including what it does to water, right? So the clear glass bottle is sort of the absolute minimum. There's a company in California that's trying to create this ultimate water, right? And they go into these caves at night and they only transport the water at night because they don't want sunlight penetrating it and providing information to the water until someone's just about to drink it.
That's
So,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, 'cause what our ancestors do, they would scoop it out of a river and then drink it fresh out of the river, right? The river meaning running over rocks, providing minerals. The river rock filters the water, right? Moving water is clean. So, but what we do is we have it on a plastic bottle sitting on a store shelf, losing its frequency and information, instead charging us with toxicity because it will hold on to negative information too.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing information right there. All right, let's jump into. All right. Like, for example, you talked about Perrier. I mean, I'm a big drinker of like Pellegrino and
Yeah.
waters like that, usually out of a glass container. Uh,
Yep.
but I mean, do those, for example, my daughter has like an app that tells you, you scan the water, scan products, and it kind of gives you like a rating. It tells you what it has in there. And like Topo Chico, which is like a Mexican, but I think it was purchased by Coca-Cola. They're in glass bottles and they had a very high rating of minerals and all that good stuff. And Pellegrino, not so high. Perrier, even lower. Even though some of them come in glass bottles, I mean, do you think that these waters are actually, bottled at the source so I'm a uh, big time. That's basically almost all I drink. Really, it's mineral water like that, like seltzer type water.
Yeah.
What is the negatives on that?
So we're finding a lot of the large commercial brands like Pellegrino,
Hmm.
finding forever chemicals and heavy metals in the water. So
Damn.
remember, when to get to that scale, you need a certain level of industrial processing, right? Which means the water goes through machine and equipment, and there's residue, And when we're finding that, in fact, I posted a video about this, about Pellegrino water and how there's like forever chemicals
I didn't
and
see
heavy.
that. Okay.
Yeah. And people were like, not again, and here goes another one, right? Because they thought they were doing something right. That doesn't mean all bottled water is bad. It just means that as soon as you bring anything to scale, nothing was meant to be processed in that way, right? And so you'll find that all these companies start out with good intentions, not saying they have bad intentions, but they have to fulfill a certain level of growth,
Yeah.
and then the integrity of the processing changes. And with that comes negatives, including contaminants in like literally forever chemicals, heavy metals that are beyond the Environmental Protection Agency recommendations for what's safe. And that's where some of
Wow.
these companies are.
Wow. Wow. Hope my listeners are paying attention to this very, very clearly. All right, on to the next thing. Let's talk about vegetables. What have you found? Everybody talks about vegetables. They're good for you. They're good for you. Give me the ones that you have found were maybe even carry some type of toxicity and have really
Yeah.
done terrible things.
Well, I study people genetically, so I understand that it's first of all not the same answer for everyone.
Okay.
Certain people that have very good ability to make digestive enzymes for certain foods, and some people
Hmm.
don't. And that's why
Hmm.
somebody will go to lunch and have a kale salad and feel great, and somebody else is like bloated and can't eat dinner that day because their gut gets wrecked. There's a gene called FUT2 that tells your body how to make the enzymes for certain plant foods, including the leafy green stuff like spinach and kale, right? And I would say I've studied the DNA of thousands of people now, many thousands, and you're much more likely to have the bad version of the gene than the good version of the gene. So
Hmm.
you're much more likely not able to thrive as a vegan than you are able to thrive as a vegan because that same gene also makes the enzymes for plant proteins. So how well do you live off of beans, lentils, chickpeas as a vegan is genetically predetermined. It's not the same for everybody. So first of all, there's a big nuance where if you don't feel good, if you lose muscle mass, if your gut feels off, it's probably not the right thing for you, even though some influencer said it is. But if you feel great, it's because you did break it down and digest it fast. Now, having said that, even then, the spinach, the broccoli, the kale, these are not real food, right? Broccoli didn't exist prior to the 1950s. It's man-made. Kale wasn't eaten before the manufacturers that supplied Pizza Hut's buffet said, how do we turn this garnish into something that people eat, right? Baby spinach didn't exist until we had to turn it into something that you could put into a blender. These foods are all rich in something called oxalates. So there's certain foods that have oxalic acid in them. And when you eat these foods, the oxalic acid forms a crystal called an oxalate. The oxalate enters your gut and rips your gut wall apart. And this is why so many people have leaky, dysbiotic guts. They also have anti-nutrients in them, like phytic acid, that pull minerals and nutrients out of your body. So this kale superfood propaganda that was put out there, which it truly was a PR company that was hired to create the propaganda around it, took something and took it's kind of like let me tell you 2% of the story and that becomes 100% of the story. Let me tell you about a couple nutrients in here and tell you how great this thing is and call it a superfood, but I'm not going to tell you the other 10 things in it that are going to destroy your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the phytic acid will make you sick, the oxalates will make you sick, and then people put them in a blender, spinach smoothie, and the oxalate becomes 10 times more bioavailable because now it's liquefied. It's even worse. So having said that, your ancestors didn't know what kale was. Baby spinach didn't exist. Broccoli didn't exist, right? And I hate to say it because broccoli chicken is a great thing for someone that's trying to get in shape. But go back to ancestral roots. If it doesn't have seeds, if it doesn't have flesh, your ancestors didn't eat it.
Hmm. All right. All right, so that's interesting. So I mean, what I got out of this is broccoli wasn't even a thing till the 1950s. That's crazy. You think like these vegetables are like, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they're so natural, but a lot of them aren't, huh?
No, and when our ancestors ate plants, think about a farmer. Now, as a context to everything we're talking about here today, people should know that our DNA hasn't changed in 250,000 years, which means you and me sitting here, the wiring of our body is exactly the same of a caveman from 250,000 years ago. Nothing has changed,
Well,
right? The DNA is the same. There's no evidence of evolution in humans. We don't see that. So, why do I say that? Because the vast majority of your biology still thinks that that's how you live.
hmm.
And how did our ancestors eat plants? They didn't go to Whole Foods and buy a bundle of cauliflower.
Yeah,
They would harvest the crops, which would grow for some time, and they'd have to, harvest the entire yield, which meant it was way too much food for that moment.
crazy.
And so they needed to store it. And so how did they store it? They would pickle it and they would ferment it, which also means I found over and over and over again, people that have good genetics for eating plant foods also have really bad genetics for managing the diversity of their gut microbiome bacteria. Why? Because if you have good genetics around eating plants, the assumption is that you're eating them fermented and pickled because they got stored, not fresh from a grocery store, which means you were eating bacteria, fermented bacteria foods, and you didn't need to manage your bacteria in your gut. And it was coming from an external source. And then we find people that have bad genetics around eating plant foods and they're more like carnivore, have really good genetics around maintaining their gut bacteria because they didn't eat the fermented food, right? So know that about plants. Think more ancestral. Even like going back to grandma and grandpa is not enough. Go back further because we haven't changed for tens of thousands of years.
Hmm. I saw a video that you had the other day. Maybe it was longer than a couple of days ago. It was maybe a week or two ago regarding Japanese honey.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a very popular, I mean, expensive type of honey. And you're looking at it and you're saying, well, this is supposed to be really good for you. But what did you find in that?
So it's Manuka honey from New Zealand. And what
Yeah,
we
that's
found,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and the Japanese government said that they're banning the import. And like, why would
Yeah,
they do
that's it.
that? It's an incredible superfood, right? And this is what I mean by once you get to a certain level of scale,
Hmm.
that you lose the integrity of where you started, the original intention. And what we're finding is New Zealand openly allows the spraying of glyphosates on these manuka trees, right? And I'm not saying every brand does it. There's many brands that don't, but most do. And glyphosate residue is being found in the honey. And we have this battle in the United States of getting glyphosate out of our food, but it's now been exported globally, and New Zealand is spraying it. So yeah, we're finding that you have to be careful. There are certain brands that are clean, but just make sure that they have certification around glyphosate free. Otherwise, it's guaranteed it has glyphosates in it.
All right, let's go down the road of one of my favorites road. Everything is organic, right? You got
Yeah,
that little organic label on stuff. And the question is, what does it even mean? Right?
yeah,
A lot of people don't even really know what it means. They just pay the extra dollar or two because it's organic. So
yeah,
have you done any research around organic foods and
yeah. So there's actual like legislation on what qualifies as organic. And it essentially means it's not sprayed with anything that's toxic and not from nature, right? So organic means it came from Mother Nature. It wasn't man created. And so there is truth to if it's labeled as organic, the farmer never intentionally sprayed it with anything and it grew up in its natural state. That does not mean it's not genetically modified, right? It does not mean that it's broccoli is a man-made Frankenstein, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that the organic farm didn't sit right next to an inorganic farm and was oversprayed anyway from the wind blowing stuff around. This is why we're seeing so many farmers have things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's because of their use of agricultural chemicals,
Mhm.
right? From that exposure, it's not just about eating it. We're also finding that, the soil is dead. So just because it's organic doesn't mean it's nutritious. because if it grew up in dead soil that's been sprayed and there's no worms that are pooping in the soil and creating microbial activity, and it's just a dead, like styrofoam, basically, right? So, having said that, regenerative farming is a practice that is true to our ancestral habits. So, regenerative means it is organic, but the soil is also considered. It's not just about the plant, right? And what is a vegetable or fruit? It's a conduit that takes nutrition from the soil and converts it into a form that we can consume because you can't eat a handful of dirt.
Right.
If the soil is dead, it doesn't matter what the plant is, it's not providing you much anyway, right? So regenerative farming, and there's so much more now, and there's even apps where you can download that will tell you local regenerative farms.
Hmm.
That's the best we have right now. I'm not saying don't buy organic, I do, right? But I'm saying that as a simple example, I would rather buy a bag of frozen, non-organic wild blueberries than buying a container of organic blueberries. Why? Because that container still was plucked raw, sorry, I should say, and ripened in the back of a truck, did not absorb nutrients from the dirt. The wild blueberries mean they were wild in the bush, which by nature is organic, and also were plucked from the vine, fully ripened, and then frozen, right? So you have to sort of hack industrial processing and think about the steps, and then you'll actually get the nutrient value you're seeking.
Interesting. Interesting. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. So now let's kind of start walking the road towards meat and chicken.
Yeah,
You know, that's such a it's such a different type of world. When I came up, it was just meat, grass-fed
yeah.
meat. Really didn't, it wasn't like a thing. So explain to those, even me, like I don't even understand what grass-fed beef is. Like, what does it mean? I know it's supposed to be better, but
Yeah. So the first is like, what was the problem they're trying to solve? The problem is that cows are fed soy pellets and grain,
mhm.
which is not what they naturally eat. When watch Yellowstone with Kevin Costner, and you'll see what a cow is supposed to eat. It's supposed to graze in the pasture and eat grass,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And grass that's in its natural state, not sprayed, healthy soil, right? And that cow then turns that grass. It will actually make certain enzymes that allow that grass to become protein rich, and this is that whole argument over veganism is good because look what a horse eats. It eats grass. Yeah, but you don't make the enzymes that a horse makes to take that grass and convert it into the proteins you need, right? So cows do that, right? You don't have four stomachs like a cow. So anyways, having said that, um, now fast forward, you have industrial farming to sort of supply what we need. And so animals don't move. Animals eat pellets that make them grow faster. Animals are fed hormones that make them grow faster. Animals are depressed because of their lifestyle, which makes them eat toxic because their hormones, remember, the base hormone for all your hormones is something called oxytocin. And oxytocin is the foundation for everything, testosterone, estrogen, which means if you don't have love, if you don't have pleasure and happiness, you don't have everything else. This is why, even something like hugging someone is a form of therapy because you start making oxytocin. So if it's grass-fed, pasture-raised, meaning that it is roaming around,
Hmm.
just grass-fed. Good grass-fed, not pasture-raised means it could
Hmm.
still be locked up in a cage and just grass thrown in the cage, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pasture-raised, grass-fed, grass-finished because they often finish it with soya pellets to make sure it gets fattened right before the beginning, and organic. So you need all four: pasture raised, grass fed, grass finished, organic. Now you have what Kevin Costner eats at Yellowstone Park, right?
Mind blown right there. So do
Yeah.
they label that in some of the meat? Is that
Yep.
something that they'll go boom, 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 boom?
They're all labeled. Yeah. And
All
the big
right.
one that you're seeing right now is grass fed. And what's happening is these industrial farmers, they lean on that label and they just throw, soy pellet laden grass into the cages with the locked up cows anyway. So it's not what you think you're getting. Has
Hmm.
to be all.
Great. Good stuff. What about chickens? What's the situation there?
So chicken, again, I hate to sound like a Debbie Downer where everything's a problem, right? But my
No, but
job,
I want to know. This is
yeah,
important. I think everybody wants to know this.
Yeah, and that for everything that I say there's a problem, there's a solution. Like there are
Sure.
companies, like there's a company called Primal Pastures that sells amazing
Right.
grass-fed. So you just have to know what to look out for, what to avoid, and there's always something that is beneficial. I eat every day, right? That's still with all the problems, there's something to still go to, right? Chicken was never meant to be consumed. What our ancestors did was they used chickens to get eggs, right? And what they ate was the eggs. Egg is one of the best foods a human can eat. Every single nutrient you need is in there, right? And it's low calorie, high nutrient density. If again, it's a pasture raised organic chicken that walked around on the ground eating worms, not fed soy and crap, which is why you'll see go buy pasture raised organic eggs. It has a dark orange yolk full of nutrition. Go to Starbucks and get like an egg McMuffin thing, and you'll see it's like a pale yellow yolk, right? Industrial garbage.
Yeah.
So now chickens themselves, if you go back, say 2 generations, a chicken used to be a kilo, which I don't know what that translates into pounds, a couple pounds,
Yeah. A
right?
couple pounds.
Go then, sorry, I'm Canadian, so I'm giving you Canadian
I
numbers.
got
Right? So go then, last generation, and a chicken was 2 kilos. Now they're four, right? They've increased in size 400% in 2 generations.
you. Hmm.
That's not genetic, that's not natural, that
Hmm.
is engineering by man.
Hmm.
And that's why when you go to certain places, say go to like a Kentucky Fried Chicken and eat that versus going to some fancy restaurant eating chicken, the texture, the flavor, everything is different, right? If you go get pasture raised organic chicken, it's gamey and it's nutrient dense. You eat a chicken breast and you're full.
Hmm.
You go get some Kentucky Fried Chicken, eat 5 pieces and you're still hungry because it's fluff,
Hmm.
right? So knowing that one thing is that the industrial chicken, 4 times its volume doesn't mean 4 times the nutrition. Second thing is industrial chicken is loaded with something called linoleic acid. There's a guy named Dr. Mercola who's one of the pioneers of the natural health movement. He's one of the first guys that really pushed supplements and help people get healthy without medicine, right? And he did some research, and I was talking to him at this conference, and he showed me this data with the introduction of linoleic acid through vegetable and seed oil and through chicken, and the chronic disease rate, and how the lines just go together like this, right? Because linoleic acid is one of the most inflammatory things in our food supply, and industrial chicken gives you a chock full of it, ton of it. We're not supposed to eat it, right? Um, we're meant to eat um, small, gamey 1 kilo chickens that are nutrient dense that eat worms so they don't produce toxic byproducts like linoleic acid. And we're primarily meant to eat their eggs, not their meat,
Hmm.
right?
Wow. Damn. All right. So, wow. What about pork? What is your take on that?
So pigs in general were not designed again for consumption,
Hmm.
given the nature of the beast. The beast is pigs don't have sweat glands. They don't detoxify. So you're
Hmm.
eating very toxic meat. Pigs
Hmm.
also there's a gene that causes you to express a histamine response. So, when you have an allergy, you flare up, that's a
Hmm.
histamine response. So your body goes into like a inflammatory state that's very acute, right?
Hmm.
Pigs don't do that. They have this genetic superpower where they don't get inflamed and they don't have a histamine response, which is why they can eat anything, garbage, they can eat their own poop, right? So by nature, this was a survival trait for a pig which allowed it to roam, in the wilderness, in the desert, and eat whatever without feeling sick. Now, that doesn't mean the animal was healthy. It doesn't, but it didn't feel it, which allowed it to survive and move on to when eventually greener pastures it ate something clean and healthy. Now, that being said, you're eating the meat of something that doesn't know when it's eating the wrong things because it has no histamine response and it doesn't sweat, so it doesn't detoxify. So where's those toxins if it didn't remove them? It's in its body. Where? Primarily in fat. That's where your body will store toxins. To keep your body likes to store toxins in fat because it keeps it away from your organs. Doesn't want your kidney and your liver and your heart getting inflamed. So tuck it in fat. It thinks it's a safe zone. But when you eat pork, like what are you eating? You're eating bacon full of fat, right? You're eating all these fatty cuts, eating that very heavy dose of toxicity that the pig could not remove. So this is why when you look at like ancient religious texts, they all say don't eat pork, right? They'll tell you it's like it's literally a sin to eat pork.
Yeah.
Christianity, Islam, Judaism, you go back, right? Why? Because at that time, it's like we didn't have the emergency medicine to deal with somebody who was sick, so let's not cause the sickness. And we knew that this thing does, so stop eating it. And this is why it does. So you can still go to a, pasture raised, organic, high quality farm of some sort, and I'm sure there's incredible pork in certain parts of the country. But for the majority, that's not true. And one other big thing I should tell you about pork, and this will really open your eyes to how far gone the industrial food supply of the United States is. The largest pork producer in the United States is owned by China.
Hmm.
And why does that matter? Because China thinks of it as a national security issue, food supply, right? So they needed to outsource their production. Why did they choose the United States? Because the laws in what they're allowed to do in terms of toxicity, feed, removal of poop and waste are way more lax in the United States than they are in China. So the things that they're allowed to do in the United States are illegal in China,
Yeah.
which is why they
Yeah.
came to the United States to do their pig farming,
Wow.
right? So that shows you how toxic the food is. That in China, the stuff we do here is illegal.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Wow. Hmm. All right. So let's dive into the ocean. Fish.
yeah.
Um, you would think that, eating fish from the ocean is fresh, but a lot of these, I mean, I've read some of the preservatives that they put in packages to make the fish last for a little bit longer or whatever. But what's your take on fish and kind of seafood in that world?
So seafood is an incredible food, but it's difficult to get the good stuff. Let's just say that.
Hmm.
Uh, Farm salmon is on the top of the things you can eat that's the most toxic. And we have
Wait,
this
wait, say that again. Farmed, raised salmon.
is probably top three most toxic food you can eat.
Crazy.
They're
Yeah.
going to be in the top three for sure. And so, what is farm salmon? It is, this is how bad it is. And let me tell you about farm salmon. Let me tell you about it as first.
Hmm.
That when you go to the store and you buy Atlantic wild salmon,
Hmm.
that's actually a breed of fish
Hmm.
that the United States and the FDA allows farmers to claim, and it's farmed. Because people are catching on to the fact that farm salmon is so toxic, they're trying to avoid it. So the FDA they allowed this naming of a new breed, and the breed is called Wild Atlantic. So the word wild is in the name of the breed, so that they can label it as Wild Atlantic, and it's
That's
farmed.
wild.
Yeah, this is wild, huh?
Yeah.
So yeah, and because wild Atlantic fishing is illegal. They depleted the fish stores and they're almost extinct. So you can't even farm. Sorry, you can't even fish wild Atlantic. So anyways, that shows you how the food system is masking things and the FT is playing game with them. So having said that, when you farm fish, there's ways to do it properly. Like in Norway, and they farm very healthy, clean fish, but America, no. So it's like picture being in a fish prison where they're all up against each other. They don't swim, they don't move, they're fed garbage, toxic soy and growth hormone to grow very quickly. The meat is so toxic that it's gray, and they have to inject it with orange dye to make it look like salmon. You know the gray belly that you see in salmon?
Yeah.
The whole fish is that color. It's disgusting.
Wow.
And it's one
Yeah,
of the
man.
most inflammatory foods you can eat. Now, on the other hand, proper wild caught, you have to have the word caught in there to know that it's actually wild. It's not a scam. Wild caught salmon is one of the most incredible foods you can eat. If you
Okay.
were to eat one thing every day for the rest of your life, it's wild salmon with some kind of plant of some sort, right? Depending what your how your body consumes things. So the complete opposite of each other, and we think they're the same, they're not. They're also a major source of parasites, right? That farming process is why there's a major parasite epidemic in the United States right now. All these people eating sushi and farm fish all the time, where it's a breeding ground for parasites. They're in toxic water, toxic food, butt up against each other, parasites like crazy. So that's another thing. One of the big concerns around seafood in general is the sort of microplastic contamination. We're finding it's like so prolific now. It's very hard to escape in seafood. And the other thing that's hard to escape in seafood is mercury and heavy metals. So that's one place where you have to be really, really. So pork, I say just don't eat it, right? Chicken, make sure it's organic, pasture raised, gamey. Beef, make sure it's pasture raised, organic, grass fed, grass finished. Seafood, you have to be very selective about where it came from. And you'll find that if you are selective and you buy the good stuff, it's very expensive. And this is where we've lost touch with reality, that we forgot what it actually takes to bring food to our table. And it is expensive. You aren't supposed to be able to eat sushi for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day and throw away half of it because you're not hungry anymore, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
It's supposed to be a scarcity, a thing that you have gratitude for receiving.
that's right. That's right.
So so good quality food is not cheap, but good quality food is so nutrient dense you don't need to eat as much. And we've been reprogrammed in the United States in terms of our belief and understanding of how much we need to eat in a day. And that perpetuates the industrial food supply of nutrient dead food, which is why the volumes are so high. If you eat properly, high quality stuff, yeah, it's pricey, but you probably can eat one meal a day and be better off than somebody with 3 meals of industrial garbage per day.
Makes total sense. Totally. All right. Milk, orange juice, what else? Like, add almond milk and, all these types of milks. And
Yeah,
I don't even, they have names for them. Every month they have a new type of milk or a new, type of mixture.
yeah,
What's your take on that? I mean, there's some of it is so processed. You just look at it and it's like, what is this? Supposed to come out of
yeah,
a
yeah.
cow, but by the time you get it, it's like, so, and then orange
Yeah.
juice, the same thing, you know?
You know, it's illegal where I live in Canada,
Hmm.
China, in most of Europe to buy American milk
Ha, listen
because
to
of
that.
the hormones, yeah, that are in it that will make you sick. You cannot buy American milk here. It's illegal, right?
That's
There's
crazy.
certain farms that are clean, but the general industrial milk in your grocery store, can't buy it
Mhm.
here. So imagine if China says no thanks, right? Put a legal slap on there. So that's what's going on with American milk. Now, again, you can buy good stuff and you have to. I would drink goat milk, if anything. Goats by nature you can't really industrially farm them. They're too smart. They need to graze. They need to eat grass. You can't lock them in a cage, right? They move around,
Mhm.
and it's very nutrient dense. Go, you have maybe there's a flavor profile thing, but the goat milk manufacturer got much better at it. So it's that's what I use, and that's what I would advise people use. Sheep
Mhm.
milk also.
Mhm.
Now the plant milks. There's something to be said about getting some almonds or some cashews and at home grinding them up and extracting this liquid and using oat milk or sorry, almond milk, fine. Going to a store and buying an industrial oat or almond or cashew or nut milk of some sort, you have to understand what it took to get it in that scenario. Read the ingredients, and you're usually going to find two things: gums and seed oils, vegetable oils. And what you think you're drinking as a milk is actually, in a major part, seed oil and vegetable oil. And we know how those destroy your body, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the big problems with them. The other problems is these foods are really rich in oxalates. So there's a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people I deal with that are health nuts that are quote unquote doing everything right and are very sick. How many of that picture that young California woman who only eats vegan, raw, whatever, and exercises and does Pilates 5 days a week and whatever, but meanwhile they're knocking at my door saying, I have anxiety, there's blood in my stool, I have crazy menstrual cycle issues, and da da da. Why?
Huh.
You're doing everything right,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the thing that they're told is right is wrong. And it's like, oh, animal fat is bad. Well, why then the countries that have the highest life expectancies in the world, that's all they eat? If you look at Europe and France and Switzerland, who eat the most fat, have the least heart disease,
Is that
right?
crazy? Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at Singapore, which
Hmm.
Singapore went from having one of the world's worst life expectancies two
Hmm.
generations ago to now having the world's top three. They're in their 90s, right? They went from 60s to 90s in 2 generations, and they eat a lot of fat and meat. That's mostly all they eat, right? But they don't eat it in a fluffy white burger bun full of gluten and chemicals and glyphosate and all that, right? So, Anyway, so going back to it is yeah, the plant milks. It's also like when we say almond milk, what are you talking about? Are you talking about going to a store and buying something processed in a box that's full of seed oils and fillers and chemicals and oxalates? Or did you get organic, clean food and just grind it and make it yourself? Which I can't deny there's no problem there, right? It's still better to get some goat milk or sheep milk and get the nutrients like the B vitamins and the D vitamins and everything else you need.
Sure.
Um, the one other thought there is these um of all these, I would say the biggest threat, which is kind of hit the market really fast and hard, is the oat milk, right? So oat is another anti-nutrient rich food, phytic acid rich food. Was meant to be an emergency backup plan when there was no food available. Was not meant to be, let me eat my overnight oats because I'm into fitness, right? It will wreck your gut, it'll pull nutrients out of your body, and oat milk is one of the big reasons why so many women are struggling with Starbucks in their hand every day, right?
Hmm. Oh man, that's a lot of information there. Coffees, like you mentioned Starbucks. I mean, like these, coffees and all sorts of, you know, I have friends in El Salvador. I have friends in Guatemala, and I've gone to, where they actually make coffee, and it's a different. The coffee there tastes so different
Yeah.
than what we're drinking here in Starbucks or in Dunkin' Donuts or whatever.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? I mean, I love coffee. I love the smell of it. But sometimes you say, man, what are all the chemicals that are, that these coffees are being put through?
So a cup of coffee is a great thing in terms of its phytonutrient profile, in terms of, it's not, it shouldn't be like I need 3 cups of coffee to get through the day. That's hurting you more than it's helping you.
Hmm.
Right? The way coffee works is it blocks these hormones that allow you to actually feel how tired you are. It actually occupies the same receptors, and so it's not giving you energy, it's hiding how tired you are. And then you get this crash because the caffeine leaves the receptors and the adenosine hormone gets loaded into there, and then you crash, right? So if you're using it to like give yourself this fake energy, don't. If you're using it as a morning go and some nutrient value, great. Um, most industrial coffee is moldy, which is another reason why so many people are so sick. The nature of the industrial food system is food stuff, like the grains and the raw materials are shipped in containers, right? And that's where they develop the mold. So I would say a good 30% of our mold exposure today doesn't have anything to do with our drywalled and leaky basements. It has to do with the food we're consuming and things that get transported into containers. And mold is a potent toxin. It will live in your gut for a long time. They produce mycotoxins and volatile compounds that cause you to get sick and inflamed, right? So this is one of the, that non-organic industrial coffee is a major source of today's mold epidemic and another reason why people are struggling. Um, Knowing that all those oat and almond milks that we just talked about that everyone wants to put in their coffee destroy any nutrient value you're getting. So when you
Hmm.
drink coffee, there's a very real, I'm getting nutrition from this coffee. There's very powerful antioxidant phytonutrients that are anti-aging and sort of purpose. But as soon as you add the oat milk, almond milk, nut milk, it kills them. So you're now just drinking a fake energy boost with like mold, right? And
Yeah.
seed oil from the oat milk. So that, add the oat milk to my coffee, you're killing it. Black is the best. The other thing to consider is the mold. Mold is a natural thing that coffee has to combat anytime, like all the time, because of where it grows in the tropics, right? So caffeine is one of the natural tools that the coffee bean uses to fight off the mold. And so decaffeinated coffee is even much more likely to be moldy, right? Just it doesn't have its natural defenses, and especially if it's pre-ground decaffeinated coffee, which so many people drink just because of the morning routine, you're almost guaranteed you're drinking mold. So look for organic. There are many companies that now sell organic mold-free coffee. Very, very important because it's like a daily sip of mold. You don't want to be doing that.
Wow. Good info right there. All right. So while we're, on the path of drinking, what about these Red Bulls and the Bang drinks and all these, drinks that, have supposed to have all these great things in there, but when you start reading, you're like, what is all this stuff? And what's your
Yeah, yeah.
take on those?
There's people that have literally died from that stuff. And you a coffee is what, like 50 to 100 grams of caffeine. Then you have like 2 to 400 in an energy drink. Is that really what the body is supposed to take in? There's this I think it's Panera Bread that was selling these caffeine loaded sugar drinks, and literally people were dying from them, having heart failure. And they kept selling them. The FDA never even stepped in. I posted videos about that too, actual cases of with names of people that have actually died from drinking those drinks.
Wow.
So yeah, so again, if you're taking in 2 to 400 milligrams of caffeine to feel good enough to go about your day, you're sick. And I mean that you're probably loaded with toxins, metals, mold, something that's causing your mitochondria to struggle, because you should be able to make enough energy to not need that, right? If you're a student that's trying to stay up all night and study for an exam, I can understand you're biohacking yourself, and I don't mind that. Once in a while, pushing your body, as long as you know that that night of poor sleep needs to be made up for, right? Uh, I don't recommend anyone disrupts their sleep for any reason, but I understand there's circumstances where you just can't help it. You're a doctor in an emergency room, right? So, but if it's a habit and if it's like getting you through the day, you are sick. You shouldn't need that to get through the day. And not all sickness starts at when the symptom was diagnosed. That's too late. By the time somebody tells you you have diabetes, you have cardiovascular disease, you have autoimmune conditions, that's 10 years after the problem started. The problem started the day your toxic burden became higher than the cellular energy capacity, your mitochondria, which every one of your cells in your body have mitochondria in them. Mitochondria are how you make energy to thrive. And as soon as that equation gets broken, where there's more toxicity and more inflammation, then you have energy to deal with it. That's where disease starts. But it takes years. Your body will defend you, defend you, defend you, and eventually get to a place where the disease wins. So I'm saying all this because once in a while emergency, no big deal. But if you go to any grocery store, the amount of Monster and Red Bull being sold, that's not an emergency. It's a cultural habit, right?
Yeah, no joke. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that means that people are zombies walking around sick, solving the wrong problem. You need to dig deep, do a toxin test of some sort, figure out what's in your body and get it out.
All right, so we've connected all this, and I'm trying to figure out, can we connect some of this directly to diabetes, to emphysema, to any mental, anything mentally bad like Alzheimer's, forgetting things. Can we connect any of this to that?
All of it. All of it.
All right, well, there you go.
Got
Okay.
chronic disease. There's acute emergencies. I broke my arm, right?
Mhm.
That's an emergency. There's genetic conditions
Yeah.
born with some anomaly and you have it. Then there's chronic disease, which, by the way, is 90% of the $4.3 trillion American healthcare industry. Chronic disease. The actual number is 90%. $3.6 trillion is spent on this. What? Dealing with something that you caused. It was caused. It did not have to happen. It was optional. Now, I'm not blaming the people that have it because they didn't know any better. We were told, go do whatever you want, eat what you want, breathe what you want, and when you're broken, the doctor will fix you. That's the doctor's job. That's what we were told. The truth is, how do I study somebody who's healthy, adopt their habits so that the problem never happens? And if you understand how aging happens, aging is your DNA getting oxidized and damaged from environmental threats, stressors, everything that causes inflammation. And the longer you avoid inflammation, the less oxidation to your DNA and the longer you live. We are genetically designed to live 120 years. If you look at the actual physical structure of our cells, they literally, as a, on the shelf product, should come with a 120-year warranty.
So like 80 years old shouldn't be like a big thing.
No, no.
Oh,
And then you would ask, well, if that was true, why does the average American live till 78? Well, you can't just think with blinders on American centric. There are many cities in the world, Okinawa, Sardinia, Ikara, now Singapore, where people regularly live over 100. It's the normal thing. And those people don't die from chronic disease like they do in the United States. They just die of old age. They just die of frailty, just getting old, right? Chronic disease in America, the first one you have at the age of 55, second by the age of 65. You spend the last 15 years of your life in treatment. That's the average. So, what's the difference between this country and all those other places? Not one place, but many places where people
Hmm.
regularly get to 110, 115, 120. Environment, nutrition, lifestyle. Those are the three buckets.
Yeah.
What am I breathing? Environment. What am I breathing? What am I exposed to? What chemicals are in my neighborhood? What do I use in my home? Nutrition. What's in my food and what supplements do I take? Or why would I even need supplements if my food is giving me what I already need? And
Hmm.
then third, lifestyle. How many hours a day do I work? What do my relationships look like? How do I sleep? How do I move my body? These three buckets are where all the solutions are, but none of these can be patented as sold as a medication. And that's why we don't talk about them. But this is the secret to health, is these three things. And if you adjust these things and go look at the people of those locations, they're doing these things right. And they don't cause the disease. They don't cause it. So, and this is why the wealthiest empire that's ever existed, the United States, is also the sickest because we've come to believe that we don't have control over where disease comes from. It's hereditary. It's not.
All right. So now let's hook into what exactly we can do better to avoid these pitfalls, right? From a standpoint of how do we avoid or at least, lengthen that road of staying healthy, right? Avoiding diabetes, certain foods that you recommend, certain supplements that you recommend. Same thing with, Alzheimer's. From your research, really, where is the I don't want to say the holy grail, but where is it that point where people could stay healthy? Say you're 50 and you've eaten, everything you've said. It's been like, yeah, I drink this. So that's our baseline. How can we get the next 30 years, 40 years of our life shifted from this point on?
If you were to do three big things,
Hmm.
and I believe everybody needs to do this.
Hmm.
Step one is your nervous system. Are you in fight or flight? What does your stress burden look like? What does your trauma look like? You're, especially if you're a female over 40 and you're still living with trauma you haven't resolved. If you're in fight or flight, which is an actual state your body enters where the stress burden is so chronic, which our ancestors didn't have. They used to live on the farm, tell stories around the fire. Their life was good, other than an acute problem like war or famine. That's when they would have chronic stress ongoing for some number of months. So still till today, your biology is receiving that signal of chronic stress as, oh, I must be gone to battle.
Hmm.
This is war. And so what does
Hmm.
it do? It changes the priorities of your body. It starts deprioritizing blood flow to your organs, but instead to your fists. Get
Hmm.
ready to
Hmm.
fight, your feet. And so less detox, less nutrition to your organs, more to your fists. It keeps inflammation high just in case you get stabbed by a sword that you repair quickly. So you stay in this chronic inflammation state, right? It also shuts off your rest and recovery. So your body's able to ability to repair and fix, and that's all gets turned off. Instead, get ready to use this energy for emergencies. And you can stay there for years, 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 right? And many of us know we're there. Like our nervous system is hyper vigilant. We're always on edge. We're always ready to react, right? We hate the people around us. We're always triggered. That's what fight or flight feels like. It's like I can't just rest. I feel guilty that I'm not productive right now, right? That kind of feeling. Resolving that, and again, we could have an entire 1 or 2 hour conversation just on that. Number two is your gut. And most of us have a dysbiotic, either leaky gut or a somewhat hypervigilant antibody driving autoimmune gut. And very few people are not in one of those two buckets. And that gut constantly is sending signals. Your gut and your brain directly communicate through something called the vagus nerve. They're connected through wiring. And for every one signal your brain sends down, your gut sends eight signals back up. So it has eight times more influence over what your brain believes to be true. So if your gut is broken, your brain believes the body is broken. And if your gut is broken, it's probably leaky. And if it's leaky, the toxins in your food are flowing through your bloodstream, causing inflammation everywhere. Fixing your gut. Again, we could have a whole 2 hour conversation just on that, but it needs to be done. Once those two things are done, and you might be 5, 6, 7 months into your journey now you start dealing with the toxic burden. Because if you haven't dealt with these two things first, try and do some liver cleanse or detox or remove all the toxins from your environment. You're so engaged in your nervous system that you can't even handle the stress of it. You can't handle the anxiety of it, right? And the detox pills aren't even going to work because your body's in fight or flight. So that's the order: nervous system, gut, then toxic purge, toxic removal, liver, kidney support. Then whatever else you're dealing with, you can start dealing with. But you're probably a year into your journey now. And by the time you get this done, whatever you're dealing with is probably gone anyway, because it's
Oh,
probably rooted in these things,
yeah, yeah, makes
right?
sense. So I've seen some of the videos where people are drinking like, what is it, raspberry or some juice, and then they're like spilling it out, and they're like little things, little um, maggots and things like that that are
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Yeah, I've seen those. Oh, I mean, are we most people? I mean, is that what we have inside?
So we're supposed to have parasites in us, right?
Okay.
It's more that we have far too many now, and
Hmm.
that goes back to toxic food supply and weakened immune system. Remember, disease is an equation of three things: energy, the resilience of your cell, how much energy they have, how
Hmm.
strong is the warrior,
Hmm.
inflammation, what toxic burden did you receive, and immune function. You can't name a chronic disease that doesn't have some level of immune system component to it, right? So if your gut is broken, 85% of your immune system lives in the wall of your gut.
Yeah.
And if your immune system is compromised, all of a sudden the things that it was able to balance and deal with, it can't anymore. And then it becomes an environment where it's much easier for the parasite to thrive and survive. And then you're inundated with heavy metals, and parasites love heavy metals. Then you're inundated with mold, and mold and metals go together. And so there's this, complex web of our context has changed. And so the problems that we have to deal with are different. It's no longer about, oh, that guy takes supplements. He's a little woo-woo. He goes to a naturopath. Oh, he's into his health. No, it's like a necessity today. If you don't have an antioxidant strategy today, you're not going to thrive.
What are your top three or four supplements that you would recommend everybody to take?
So in general terms, I use people's DNA to tell them exactly what they need,
Okay.
right? So I can be very specific, and you'll be surprised how bio-individual we are and how our
Interesting.
genes are
Okay.
unique, right? So I'll work with like pro athletes and celebrities, and I'll sequence their DNA and tell them exactly what they need to do to get to like a little bit of a better level, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But in general terms, I would say number one is minerals. You can assume that your soil is dead, and so the mineral content you're supposed to get from food is just not what it was. And minerals are not just, oh, iron and potassium. The jobs they do in your body are far more than we comprehend, including detoxifying your cells. One simple job that we didn't know minerals do, that's what they do. Number two, I would say, given our indoor lifestyle, vitamin D. You have 22,000 genes that make up the human genome. 2,500 of those genes need vitamin D to activate. So imagine 10% plus of your biology is dependent on one thing. It's the most important nutrient in your body, right? Um, After that, I would say some level of antioxidant, so some level of detox support, because you
Hmm.
live in the most toxic environment that humanity has ever lived in.
Sure.
And again, my preference there is to use somebody's DNA to be very specific on what they need. If you don't have it, a very easy thing to do is take some NAC, N-acetylcysteine, take it with glycine because those two things work in tandem to support each other. Milk thistle is another safe one if you don't have your DNA, you don't know what to use, right? Um, After all that, I would say some level of mitochondrial support, cellular energy, again, because the toxic burden is so high that your cells are struggling with a far greater battle than they were ever meant to deal with. And so there just isn't enough cellular energy. And so there's ubiquinol, there's urolithin A, there's PQQ, there's methylene blue, hydrogen. There's lots of ways to support your mitochondria. By the way, there's a tie for fourth when it comes to women. women also, for the most part, need some level of hormone support, which your grandma didn't need because of the hormone disrupting chemicals in your environment that she didn't have to deal with. So now you're overwhelmed with estrogen dominance. So DIM or sulforaphane, these are broccoli extracts to help support hormones.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Wow, that's a lot of information, man. A lot. And do you see that, for example, when people start using and you know you work on someone, you're working on an athlete, you start seeing them shift, right? They start cleaning the way that they eat, they start taking the proper minerals, the proper vitamins, and eat wholesome foods. Do you actually with your eyes start seeing how they start changing even from a physical perspective?
Not only see, we measure, right?
Right.
So I can measure your biological age and I can figure out how old you are on the inside. And I can reverse that. I can take people with advanced aging and I can get them on the right protocol based on their DNA. And I can take 6 months and then measure their biological age is improved. And give me 2 years and we can like, take me, for example. The reason, the very first thing we talked about today was the reason I do what I do is because I was sick. And I didn't understand that doctors don't tell you why you're sick. So I figured it out myself. And at that time, I tested my biological age and I was 38 years old and my biological age said I was 43. So I was 5 years older than myself, getting
Hmm.
closer to death unnecessarily. Now I'm 45, so it's been 7 years since I started this journey and learning,
Hmm.
and my biological age is 33. And it's been 33 for 3 years in a row. So not only did I make up for the damage that was done, but I also sort of reversed time and got those years back and even further. And I'm not doing this out of vanity and trying to live forever, just with purpose in terms of I'm the guinea pig, so I know what to tell people to do, right? And the outcome has been I'm now 10 years younger than myself.
I love that. That's amazing. All right, where can people follow you? Where can they catch up with all the news, all your research? Send us there.
Yeah. I would say go to my Instagram, cashconofficial.com, KASHKHAN
Hmm.
official. And you'll find I host a lot of webinars and events because, as you can see, we have a lot of knowledge from what we learn in our clinic, and I like to share it. And I think that's step one for everybody is just awareness of how the body even works. So register for one of our webinars. If you go to the link in my bio, you'll see a webinar.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Register.
do that. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
learn, and then you'll learn what's possible, right? And we have webinars, different topics, and it's like a live online podcast where you're in the room with me and you can ask me questions right there.
Crazy. That's awesome. All right, so mostly you're on Instagram. That's your house. That's like where you do all your
Yeah,
stuff.
man, I mean,
Okay.
for me, social media was I didn't have an Instagram account 2 years ago. I didn't even know what it was, right? And when I needed to vent about COVID and all the stupidity that was going on, and what I was learning in our lab and the truth that was now finally being unraveled is true. That's why I went to social media to start talking about that stuff, and that just turned into daily teachings.
Phenomenal. Well,
Yeah,
man, look, all I can tell you, Cash, is you're very knowledgeable. I would love to have you back on the podcast for another segment for sure, especially diving into COVID and all that, because that's something that I know a lot of us want to know more about. So
yeah,
thank you for your time, man. It was an honor to
pleasure,
have you on. Okay.
pleasure. Good being here.
Thank you.